All right, welcome everybody. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you joining us tonight, and hope you had a safe and grateful week. We are going to talk about some epigenetics and how our genes do or don't define us. I'm Dr. Kristen Zawada. This is Monarch Family Chiropractic and Spinal Workshops for the ending of November. So I'm going to first read a little story or paint a picture for you of a scenario that can be very typical in our day and age and in our society. And then we're going to jump into some details about genetics, epigenetics, and how we come about to express our genetic code. So just having you listen here for a minute. Let's say that we have a child, one whose entrance into this world could have been challenging. Where there are complications during the birth process that required mom to have an emergency C-section. Baby boy from the start had a difficult life. He constantly cried. He rarely slept, had trouble with digestion, and was always uncomfortable. Mom could barely console him, and oftentimes, to relieve the discomfort and symptoms, would give him medicine prescribed by the doctor. As he got older, he had multiple ear infections, tubes, asthma, food, and seasonal allergies. By the time the baby was 5 years old, he was taking a daily inhaler, antihistamines, a laxative, and on intermittent rounds of antibiotics due to ear infections. As he gets older, the boy starts gaining weight because he's self-conscious about his body. He doesn't like to play with other children, or just has less activities due to certain programs being removed in schools. Starts to notice that allergies tend to flare up more frequently, spending more time indoors. Boy tends to turn, when lonely or not engaging with other kiddos, to either things like TV, video games, activities that are spent and is spending therefore more of his time indoors in those extracurricular activities. And he finds comfort in food, loves his candy bars, his chips, his gummy bears, and his McDonald's. In the classroom, teachers notice the inability to pay attention during class is starting to happen. And finds himself labeled with ADHD. Health problems continue to nag him throughout life, both physical and mental. He often experiences bouts of depression and anxiety. Movement and physical activity hurts the joints due to the arthritis that has developed. He has trouble balancing and sometimes is wheezing and out of breath. And the annual physicals that he partakes in present not much of any good news. Things like cholesterol raising, high blood pressure, irritable bowel, sensitive gut, and the list can go on from there. One thing we call this in chiropractic specifically when we're working with kiddos, but it's not always kiddos, is something called the perfect storm. And so I would ask, do you think that this is common in anyone you know, or in scenarios of maybe something you experienced or have experienced? We talk about the difference between normal versus common. And it's not, none of this is a normal behavior or normal responses that we want the body to have, the immune system to have, the endocrine system, which is all the other chemistry in our body, our hormones, the highs and the lows. But it is very common to see, and it's a common trend to see that happens really early in life. So we've talked about epigenetics, and we're going to go into more of it in detail this workshop. And it's really how our lifestyle choices they know and show through research affect 80% to 85% of our genetic expression. So before we talk about kind of health measures and what we do, let's switch to the slide here that you're seeing, which is just a lot of statements and some data and research in different departments of genetics and genes. And epigenetics is really the study in the field of genetics. And it's the cellular and physiological genotype. It's the trait and the variations that are caused by that external or environmental factor that can switch genes on and off. So it really affects how cells read genes instead of being caused by the changes in the DNA sequence. So there's really a factor of our environment and the things we do is really what's triggering, if you will, the genes like a light switch. It's really can turn things on and off. You can have a genetic code for something. You could be passed genetics through your, through your gene pool, through your parents, through your grandparents. Doesn't mean you have to express it. And a lot of that is determined on how we live our lifestyle and what types of things are we entering and putting into our body or giving our body to experience health, in which may trigger or not trigger those genes to switch. So in DNA, kind of a good way to describe that. Sorry, my mouse isn't working that way. Let me scroll down a little bit. There we go. We've seen pictures of that, and a lot of times I think in books and movies and different things. Imagine a ladder or a zipper that's like twisted into a spiral, right? I think that's something that we've all probably seen a picture of. DNA contains the raw information or instructions that really make us who we are and what we are. So each half of the DNA contain corresponding things, those nucleic acids, right? That we have base pairs, so they're numbering in about 3 billion per cell. So there's long sequences of these acids that we call genes. So when DNA produces proteins, and those are the raw materials in our body uses to construct on only that physical anatomy, but also the intricate functions and the interactions between and what makes up our physiology. So proteins really are controlling a lot of what our immune system is doing, how we digest our food, how we heal our wounds, how we catalyze or how we make a chemical reaction in our body, support the structural integrity of our bodies, and really communicate between cells. And so when we manufacture over 100,000 different proteins, and then plus they say these different types of regulatory proteins needed to make other proteins. Let's see if I can bring that down some. It's found that as we looked through, if anybody's watched or seen that the Human Genome Project, they anticipated that they'd find one gene per protein, but instead found almost 24,000 genes. So really significantly beyond what they imagined in science and genetics they would find. So genes have to work together in a systematic way to express or turn on or suppress and turn off at the same time within the cell. So the genetic expression, as you hear it said, is really the environment that's going on inside the body versus outside, right? So environment being inside the body of the components like we talk about a lot in here, right? The 3 T's, thoughts, traumas, toxins, things that are related to all different states, not just our physical, but that emotional, biological, the neurological, that mental and energetic state, even that, what they call, our vertical state, right? What our spiritual state is. Environment from outside is the other things we think about, right? That are truly the outside forces upon us. So it could be a trauma, but it can be just really the change in temperature or altitude, things we enter into our body, like alcohol, the types of things in our food, or virus, bacteria, or a toxin, right? So chemistry that way. So if we think between 60 and 70,000 thoughts in one day, there's a lot of discussion on how much of the brain we use, and that they think about 10-15% of it, and that 90% of those thoughts are exactly the same ones we've had before. So we do a lot of repetitive patterning over and over and over using just a small portion of our brain's capacity and ability. So this is kind of when we talk about when we go on autopilot, right? Is that, like an example, we get up on possibly the same side of the bed. We do the similar routine when we get ready in the bathroom, or that we get ready or prepare ourselves, whether it's do our makeup or comb our hair or do, some version of in that same way. How do we like to do our habits, right? I always use the example of brushing our teeth, like just switching up the neurons and the cell level of what our brain knows to do if you use it with the hand you're dominant in versus if you use it with the opposite hand. So one routine that helps me with getting out of a routine is holding my mug with my right hand because I'm left-handed, brushing my teeth with my right hand, which can feel awkward and weird and sometimes takes a little bit more time or is a little messier, but it's because I don't have that muscle memory, right? My body's not programmed like it's done for the last, 4 to 5 decades of doing it the other way. So things that challenge our brain and then change up that constant repetitive pattern and doing things exactly the same is even switching up some of those day-to-day things. If you, like I'm doing standing here, our right leg or crosser over, do the left. It's changing up things that make the brain, one side of the brain work the other side of the body. So it's like when we say literal autopilot, you could get to some place like work and almost forget how much time has gone by that you got there because you don't remember the drive because it's so routine to your brain to do. So doing some of those same things that we know how to do, same thing, even if it's just with the same people who have the same responses to us, whether it is a positive or a negative response, right? Who know how to push our buttons. Those are all things that impact our thoughts, impact the way in which we behave to things, and impact our genetics. So state of being, kind of talking through that, same thoughts create same choices, create the same actions and behaviors, create the same experiences, and can create the same feelings. So there's not a wrong thing about having a good reaction, a good feeling, a good behavior, but that's where instilling those good habits are creating a better pattern and a healthier pattern. Even if something doesn't feel great, if it's a pattern ingrained in us, it just tends to be what we lean to, right? So it's changing up that state of being. And when we don't, the brain and the body stays the same. So I think thinking about what does that mean for you and your life, and if you're thinking the same thoughts today that you will think tomorrow, lead to the same experience in the future. So when we talk about how much with adjustments too, that the brain is really, the most important, and getting that signal from brain to body and that neurology has to change and be different to create a different response, right? For the brain to know, oh, you want me to do something different this time, in a different way or in a different pattern, right? So changing patterns means changing some of those behaviors. And that can lead all the way up to those initial things that we talked about early on in life, or even just a day-to-day pattern we all choose and use. So with that, talking about the brain and how amazing it is, and a little bit more about it, which I think we always talk about brain in bigger picture, but not really diving deep. Most of it is water. And it's really that very spongy or soft consistency like a soft-boiled egg. The nerve cells, the neurons, 100 billion of them. And connections to a cell, same thing. That nerve cell and that connection that has to happen, 1,000 to 100,000 connections are being made. So we kind of sometimes relate brain like I always say the motherboard of the computer, but it's different. Each neuron is like a biocomputer, right? That there's this amount of storage that's huge, and that the processing is also huge. It's processing huge amounts of data that's coming in in milliseconds. So 100,000 functions in a second each neuron is doing, processing just what we're doing sitting here listening. When we think about processing, what our kidneys and our liver is doing, digestion system, the heart, the transforming, oxygen and things through the blood, like there is so much happening and so many connections being made. And we call that the synaptic connection. So when you learn new things or experience new things or put your body into a different experience, then the neurons make a new connection. And then it physically alters that structure of the brain, right? So as the brain then changes, that process produces different chemicals, and that's what we call our neurotransmitters. So most people know the name of like dopamine, right? Serotonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine, things like that. Those are the chemicals in our body that are produced for happy, for sad, for those emotional connections, if you will, to whatever the thing is, or experience is. So learning is creating that connection, and then remembering it is the connections that are kind of wired together, right? A connection connecting to another, that's making a bigger string of connections, if you will, creates that part of remembering, and then the long-term relationship of that is depending on how long that we make those connections come together with a new learned pattern, then we're creating that more long-term memory or relationship between the neurons of remembering kind of that autopilot, remembering it in a new way, in a new pattern, in a new process of a new normal is what I always like to say when we're talking through making pattern changes, right? A different normal or a new normal. So with new thoughts, you become that changed neurologically, but also chemically and genetically. So gaining thousands of new connections in a matter of seconds from learning or new ways of thinking about an experience or doing something in a new experience, it means that by thought alone, you can personally activate new genes right away. So it can happen just by changing your mind about something, choosing a different decision than you would usually choose for something. So I think that sometimes people think this is a very maybe a long process or long-term thing, but again, you're making immediate new connections and genes between neurons right away when you change a thought. So we talk about how this is related and why chiropractic is so important and why it plays such a big part. Because, excuse me, subluxation is really brain stress, right? It is stress upon the environment to adapt. So when it can't adapt, we have poor neurological patterns. And with the adjustment, we're releasing or changing that neuroplasticity, right, within the brain. So changing that function, and then it's allowing a different response, and we're responding to the environment differently. You also have a more responsive body when the brain and those neurons, when there's more synapses, right, and there's more connection. So when we put together a game plan or a care plan for you in the office, it's really about the success of how adjustments, changing that neurology, creating exercise and movement, or mindfulness and breathing exercises, right? That's all tapping in all the different parts of the ways we can change and adapt that genetic code. Excuse me. So why we do workshops just like this is to give you more information. As we say, a more informed consumer makes better choices, but really better able to adapt your environment, changing, yes, physical structure. A lot of times when someone comes in and it's a physical thing that they're ailing from or connecting to their pain, but it's really about changing an entire thought pattern and changing the patterns of that being something that the body thinks has to stay that way or be normal. So I'd end with some statistics. 1 in 3 children in the United States are considered obese or overweight. 1 in 13 are taking some version of a psychiatric drug. American kids spend close to 7 to 8 hours on average a day in front of computers, games, TV, electronic devices. That's a lot. That's a lot. Family and the social system, they're saying there's less than a few, like kind of average of minutes per week spent in really meaningful conversation. And this data is not new. So wondering what that is now, post-COVID, post just a lot of people connecting and being together in connection and being together in a sense, in fellowship. So we're also spending about, it says about 95% of every healthcare dollar is spent treating more symptoms rather than preventing diseases. So I think it's just also great to circle back to pulling in, what do we know? How do we make those changes? How do we take those active self-care steps, and in learning more and engaging more in this process to have more information, to be a more informed consumer. The sources there at the bottom, and there's a few others that I don't think print off onto here that Doc has put together for some of these stats. But these are some of the doctorate researchers in chiropractic as well, on both ends of things that are really well renowned and respected in many communities and circles of health, well beyond chiropractic. But Dr. Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza would be names I would jot down if you're wanting to dive into some other information about this and maybe read into more in-depth things that they tap into in the different realms of changing those patterns and changing that neural pathway. But this was just to give a brief, but hopefully some intro data as to how our brains get there, how pliable they are and how changeable they are, and yet how much of this stuff happens at a really early age, long before, decades before we have symptoms. Symptoms are the product of many repetitive, hundreds of thousands of repetitive patterns, right? And so I would say pick one thing that maybe you could relate to, that happens either in your world on a day-to-day, and maybe a pattern of something you do, and just switch up how you do it, and challenge your brain to create new synapses for healthier patterns and choices. So thank you for joining us. I hope you have a cool takeaway to come share with us in the office, or to write in on with either watching this on our YouTube channel or communicating in the office. The education station is back up and running. And the things that we had sharing gratitude this past week have made it onto the walls. So come share. We are putting our new list together for the 2024 spinal workshop season and year. So we are taking any and all suggestions, because we want to add to the schedule of things you guys want to hear about, things you want to learn about, maybe some topics we haven't covered in a long time or ones we've never covered. Drop them in the suggestion box here at the office so that Doc and I can create a 2024 schedule that piques your interest with some new topics. So we look forward to seeing you in the office, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Bye for now.